Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
Hi, I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lymond Book Club, where we are reading Checkmate by Dorothy Dunnett. And today we're going to talk about part 5, chapters 8 and 9. Almost done.
So close.
It's the penultimate session.
One more to go. So before we dive in, thoughts?
Well, if I ever have the unfortunate occurrence of knowing somebody that's in a coma, I know I can just set their bed on fire and wake them up.
Yeah, that was really.
Glad I figured that out.
I'm giving some serious side eye to that one. Like, what? Whatever. Suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
Yeah, this just felt like a lot of getting a whole bunch of people to the place where we need them to be at the end of the book. Like there was kind of a lot of like moving people around. Yeah, but it's a good setup, and I'm super nervous for the end of the book. Like I feel like the sword of Damocles is just like hanging over our heads and it's gonna fall and like things are gonna be bad, and so yeah. But he's not dead.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's not dead. You got that one.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Surprise.
Not much of a surprise, but
We were talking last time about how it's a bit of a fantasy and like sort of the expectations of genre. But yeah, the like setting the bed on fire to wake the person in a coma. I mean, it would work in a like, and it's just like the drugs in the fire. Like it's very like fantasy novel to me. It's like something that would be totally normal in a fantastic world where like that's a thing. But in historical fiction, it's like, what?
Yeah,
like though, I don't mind it terribly because A, it worked. We needed a way to get Lymond back, and B, it feels like something Nostradamus would actually do, thinking this is the way these things work. So,
and then it was like something else completely that woke him up, but it seems like it was this thing or something.
Yeah, well, and I think it gives us like the emotional stuff we want. So like I don't hold it against the book really the way that like some of the weird contrivances annoy me. I'm happy to just go with it because we finally get like Lymond and Sibylla like, being like talking to each other.
Yeah, I was kind of honestly my response to that was like, this is really dumb, whatever, and then just kept on going. Like it didn't bother me all that much. It was just I think the only part that I was really questioning, and we can talk about it when we get there, but there's this whole section about like opium and like the opium, the rooms of opium and the past and the present and all of this stuff. And so for a minute I was like, is Nostradamus drugging him? Is that why he's asleep? It's so it just got a little bit, for a half second I was kind of like, wait a second, is somebody keeping him unconscious on purpose? Which they weren't, but
no, I think that's about Lymond having been an opium addict, how it's kind of permanently changed him, and so that's just his mindscape. He's like, that's like his I actually really like that part. That's his transitional space between life and death, and it's a house that like when you're taking opium would be full of pleasurable things, but now it's full of the ghosts of the people he cared about who are dead.
It was very evocative and emotional, and it kind of gave some like why he isn't waking up, like staying in that house or not walking outside the house, or however you want to deal with the imagery. But the whole opium discussion really did throw me for a second, because I was like, wait a second, are we back in that? But yeah, it makes sense that it's just a description of his brain.
there was some sort of drug in the room that was being burned in the candles. And I
Right.
didn't think it was opium, but maybe it was also triggering some sort of reaction that was similar. Although it only seemed to affect Lymond and not everybody else that would have been inhaling the fumes. So
I think it was the same thing that was in the house when he was unconscious,
With the Dom.
when the Dom and Una were looking after him. So, because he keeps going back and forth between the past and the present. So it's like, I think we're sort of led to believe the reason it works is that it's reminiscent of that previous experience with the fire and the drugs.
Yeah, that was my take, that it wasn't actually the drug that woke him up. It just reminded him of this other time that he woke up. And so his brain was like reminded that, oh, I should wake up. And so it woke up.
And isn't that something about how Archie like told Sibylla about that?
Yeah, there's something about how they got the same drug. I forget who knew what it was or whatever. But I did have a question, and this is probably the fantasy aspect. Burning drugs in candles is not actually a delivery system for drugs, right? Like, that's not a real thing, or is it a real thing?
I think you can get high from inhaling the smoke of a drug. I know you can.
I mean, if it's marijuana, yes.
Yeah.
You can burn it. You can
burn it in a room and get high.
Breathe in the smoke. It doesn't work as effectively as inhaling it, but and don't ask me how I know that.
I did not know that.
But like powdered drugs, I don't think so. Like, I don't think it would work with cocaine or heroin or any of the powder substances. So
Might work with opium though, because you can smoke opium.
Yeah.
But this wasn't opium. This was something else.
Yeah. I was thinking of those like opium dens that you see in like Charles Dickens books.
Mhm.
And I was like, they always have this like sort of melancholy but fantastical whimsy about them.
Yeah. And they're just smoky and everyone's breathing in the smoke. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Me and my ignorance of drug intake methods.
I mean, it's probably a good thing not to know too much about.
Also, apparently go into a sauna and pour vodka on the rocks, and the steam that comes up will get you drunk. Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
No way.
Your body absorbs the sort of gaseous form of the vodka. So.
I mean, that's terrible.
We shouldn't be telling anybody to know these things.
Don't tell children that.
Learn something new every day.
Okay.
Anyway.
Should we dive in?
Let's go into chapter 8.
Okay. All right. Chapter 8. Okay, so we start with Philippa sails back to England with Adam and Austen. And she has a night terror, which is kind of like a psychic experience of what's happening with Lymond, presumably coinciding with his near-death experience. The Scottish commissioners also start to sail home, but they return after a day due to weather. And when they get back, it's discovered that they're very sick, and we can pretty much extrapolate they have been poisoned by the De Guises trying to kill the Protestants. And it's actually just because Bishop Reed had swapped ships at the last minute that he gets the poison, but he ends up being the first to die. He's a Catholic. Richard and Sibylla learn, they've come back because of this as well. They learn that Lymond is dying, so they go to him. They talk to Jarrett and Nostradamus, who reveal the blindness and suicide attempts. Marta meets with them and tells them that Lymond's blindness may be curable because he didn't have it at 70, which prompts Sibylla's drastic action of setting the bed on fire to wake him up and then shaming him for abandoning Scotland and extracting the promise he owes her, which is to live, to not try to kill himself again, and to return to Scotland.
Big promise. I thought this whole thing with Philippa, the bit that I loved about it was just that Adam like held her all night through this terror that she was having, and it's just like another like, Adam is so sweet. Just lovely man.
Thank God it was Adam and not Austen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
He was on the ship too.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just told Austen that she was sick and to leave her alone, which also lovely, lovely Adam. I will say I spent a while Googling poison that makes you thirsty, because in my mind, I know what this is. I've heard of a poison that makes you like it's intensely painful and causes a deep, deep, deep thirst, and then you die. And I couldn't remember what it was. I spent like 20 minutes Googling and I still couldn't remember what it was. I think it's a heavy metal poisoning, like arsenic or something, but or mercury. I don't know. But anyway, I couldn't figure out what it was, but I know I've heard of it because this deep thirst, I've read it in another book. But yeah, as soon as they said they were thirsty, I was like, oh, they've been poisoned.
Well, it's also something that they sort of tried to make it look like it was plague or sickness. So whatever poison it is, it has to have those sort of qualities too.
Yeah. But it wasn't hidden that well because everybody figured out it was poison pretty fast.
Well, everybody was supposed to die, so they weren't supposed to come back. They all would have died at sea, which would have made it a little bit harder to figure out that it was poison.
Yeah. Exactly. So part of what I like in this also is that Richard realizes that Lymond had been right to warn them. So we get like a little bit of this turning point that then expands later of Richard, which is also like one of my favorite things. Like he finally comes around, and like when he finds out his brother's dying, he's the one who's like freaking out and in denial, and like gets upset at Sibylla for being mean to him, everything. Richard's back to loving his little brother. He's very simple, but he's got, passionate heart.
I just wish he wouldn't like flip flop all the time. Like I'm totally expecting him in the next chapter to be a complete jerk and like abandon Lymond dying on the road or something. Like, because it would just be him. Like, I'm totally expecting him to be horrible again. So
yeah, I kind of think the Richard flip-flopping thing is like she had such a good thing going in the first book between the two of them. And it worked really well in the third book that like she just kept that winning formula, but like a lot of times when you repeat the winning formula, it stops winning because the character's just flip-flopping and it's weird.
Yeah.
It's like the will they or won't they thing, which at first is like so good, and then when it gets dragged out over like 5 seasons, you're just like, I'm so sick of this.
I'm tired of him. Like Moonlighting, it was really good in season 1, and then not that anyone remembers Moonlighting.
Even in this book, it's like, which side is George Douglas actually on? But then she just fixed that problem by killing him off.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he died in history. That wasn't our fault. But yeah, wouldn't it have been more fun if he'd still been around?
Yeah, that would have been cool.
There's also the line, it's from James Stewart, who says he thinks that Lymond has thrown in his lot with France and that the de Guises believe they can influence the cultures through him. Which, I don't know, because the de Guises don't get on well with him. So I'm not sure how accurate that is. But whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? I mean, but he also said he also thought it was an attempt to get rid of him. Like, which maybe it was, but they seem conveniently got rid of a whole bunch of other people at the same time. So
is he, I guess, like the head Protestant guy though, basically?
Him and Erskine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like then he has the scene with Bishop Reed where it's kind of like they're the two nemesis, mm-hmm. Catholic and Protestant. So it would make sense like they were trying to get rid of the Protestants, especially this guy who's the lead, and it's just lucky that he actually lived.
Yeah. And they killed the Catholic guy. Poison is indiscriminate as a weapon. Indiscriminate.
But I do actually quite like the exchange between James Stewart and Bishop Reed, mm-hmm. Where it's on Reed's deathbed, and so they have a more pleasant conversation than their, I guess, usual arguments.
Yeah.
But it like James Stewart says, I do not want war. There are others like me. Be at rest. So this idea that they could be on opposite sides and not want to kill each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Remind me, was Bishop Reed the one who presided over the trial in the first book?
Yeah,
It was him.
the one with
Okay.
the bad hearing, right? But it was like selective bad hearing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I liked it. I love when he said, it is not enough to offer justice. The laws of men, the laws of God himself are not enough unless you know the heart, the tongue, the brain, the gut of your people. And then he says that Lymond has or had the understanding and the promise of vision to understand the people, and but unfortunately he's dying. Oh no.
Well, so I like that call back to the end of the first book, because we had that Lymond's speech about patriotism. That's what the Bishop Reed is referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And like we had this promise of Lymond as this Scottish patriot at the end of the first book. And then he wasn't. He like went off and did a bunch of other stuff instead. So like we're coming full circle, like finally coming back to that. And I'm sure it resonates even more if you're actually Scottish, which is who Dunnett was, and presumably the primary audience she was writing for. And I like the way that this patriotism is about. It's about people, not about ideology. It's about protecting, kind of like protecting this small nation from the wolves, basically.
Yeah. And it's like, I just love that idea. Like, it doesn't matter what laws you set down or what laws God has set down and how you interpret those laws, because obviously these two men disagree about those things, but that the heart of the people is the key. And yeah.
And we have our foreshadowing again of what's coming and what Lymond may be needed for. When Reed says, "I tell you, there is no war worse than the war when each man is fighting for paradise." So yeah, then we get the reveal. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's
Well,
true.
when we get the reveal that Lymond is dying, and then we cut to Richard and Sibylla getting the same reveal from the governor of Dieppe, and being surprised that it was the brother, the Earl of Coulter, who suddenly covered his face with his hands while his mother said nothing. And yeah, I don't know. It still gets me that Richard can't help it. He loves his brother.
I thought that was an interesting little call to Lymond's like mechanistic descriptions when we see it's Sibylla sat like one of Master Cellini's goddesses, her face cast in metal, and so you get a little bit of that like mother like son kind of, like sometimes intense emotion gives zero affect on the face. So.
Yeah, actually I hadn't thought about that, but that that totally is true. He probably, picked it up from her or inherited it in part from her. And there's another reference later to the mechanistic idea of Lymond, and here it is with his mother. I don't know why the sand outside of the house means that he's not dead yet, but I do remember that someone on one of the groups found out why and explained it, and I forgot what it was.
Maybe because there's a lot of tracks in it, which means people are still sort of moving about trying to help him. I mean, that's the only thing I could think of.
The pouring sand, like something to do with, I was trying to think of some way like it has something to do with like keeping a sick room clean or something, like keeping mud out of it. But then it was like sand, which doesn't seem to be all that clean. So I don't know. I couldn't figure out what it would be.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't
matter.
Yeah. And then we have Jarrett guilt-stricken for saving Lymond. Apparently, he didn't mean to come back, and I brought him.
Oh, Jarrett. His deep set eyes, there was an emotion too profound to give rise to either concord or rebuttal. Oh, Jarrett.
I can't figure out why Jarrett now, after everything, is like, I should have just let him die. Like, I don't know.
Maybe he's thinking like he thinks Lymond is going to die, so all he did was save him for like 2 weeks more suffering instead of letting him die where he was. Like maybe that's what he's feeling bad about.
True. Yeah, and I think I don't know. I mean, I guess he didn't. I don't know. I forget how he reacted to Lyman's suicide attempt before, but is he like, kind of like, all right, he really wants it. It's not my place to stop him.
Maybe. I can't remember either.
Why is Nostradamus's expression when meeting Sibylla again more of anger than sympathy?
I underline that. Is he supposed to know that Lymond's mad at her? Like, is he angry on Lymond's behalf? Like, I wasn't sure.
I thought it was more the last time they met, she totally caught him out. Like she knew the whole time he was hiding behind the curtain. So maybe he thinks she can see right through me. Like I don't want her here because like if I manage to save this guy's life, everyone's gonna think I'm really great. But with her here, I'm just kind of great.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know. I feel like it's personal on some level, like that maybe he knows that her lie is part of why Lymond broke, but
that's what I thought too. But then I would thought, like, does he really care about Lymond that much? I mean,
well,
as more than just like a client.
Well, I guess there's like two parts of that. One is like everybody cares about Lymond because it's the Lymond books and all these historical figures get so involved. Who wouldn't really? But I think the other part maybe is the he's a fortune teller like the Dame de Dutante, and maybe he has a similar idea about like this is an important man of destiny and it's important for him to live, and Sibylla, you screwed it up or something like that.
Yeah, but she's sort of the one that helps bring him back, so.
For sure, but he doesn't know yet that that's going to happen, or does he?
But he's no.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, except for Johnny Bullough, who had no sort of artifice or skill at all, he was a complete hack. I feel like Nostradamus is the least effective of the fortune tellers we've seen. Yeah. I mean, we've only seen John Dee and Dame de Dutantes other than this, but
like John Dee, I think was sort of presented as like a man of science and magic, and that both were a vital part of his personality and activities. Whereas Nostradamus feels to me a little bit like a charlatan who's sometimes right. Like seems to be like the way that Dunnett has characterized him, like maybe a smart guy who can kind of read people, but a charlatan who's sometimes right, which reads kind of historically accurate in both cases. Like John Dee was an advisor to Elizabeth for decades, you know, and was really respected and all that. Whereas Nostradamus, like, was he ever more than like a
sort of a cult
curiosity kind of character? I don't know.
It's one of those people that made so many predictions that of course some of them are going to have to turn out to be correct. I don't know, Dunnett's sort of making him out to be a quack.
Yeah. Like I kind of wonder what the contemporary view of him at the time was.
Well, or even she's making it out that maybe he's got a little bit of powers, but that it's mostly hackery and that he's not like very effective either way.
Yeah.
So then we actually are in Sibylla's head, and she looks at his beautiful hands, which also belonged to another man whom she had placed before all others and always would. So even now she's putting his dead father above him and her other children, which is just weird.
Which is explicitly giving us like her entire motivation. Like there, like that's just an explicit call out to Sibylla is motivated by anything that she promised her dead love, anything that he wanted her to do, like that's going to be her primary motivation. So I still feel like we don't know what those things are yet, maybe.
I think it's weird in part because I don't know, like people often say when they have a child, they love the child more than even their partner.
That's so interesting, really?
Yeah. I've never felt a love like this before. I didn't know it was possible.
Oh Lord, my parents were so explicit about, we love you guys, but we're the most important people to each other. Like, my parents told us that. They were like, we love each, like we are both the number one person to each other, and we love you guys a lot, but you are not more important.
Oh, interesting.
It was a very explicit message as children, which was actually kind of comforting because it was like it wasn't my responsibility to be like the most important person to my parents. So it was actually kind of nice.
I guess the other part of this though is even if you loved him more, he's dead and your kids are alive.
Exactly. That's what I think. It's like he's gone, so maybe pay attention to the alive people more. Like maybe put their needs first. Yeah. I always question too characters in books and people who like want to enact a revenge against a dead person. Like often that's a motivating factor, you know, like I'm gonna get them back for whatever, and the person's dead. It's like they don't care.
No, it's all about you. You're just making yourself miserable.
Yes.
So
well, like Bailey, right? I mean,
oh my God, yeah.
His revenge was basically against a bunch of dead people, but he enacted it against the live people, like
and Sibylla.
But
he had beef with Sibylla too.
Yeah, but the primary people who suffered were Philippa and Lymond, and like it wasn't
hurting people to hurt someone else is very common. But yeah, I guess his primary beef was with the dead Francis first.
Yeah.
So then Richard is basically in denial, which I just like, you know, he's a simple but a loving person. So he's like going through the stages of grief and like denial and bargaining, and Sibylla's more mature. And then here's the machine thing. Sibylla says it is nature's way, nature's most unforgivable way of preserving a machine past its breaking point.
She's talking about the blindness.
Yeah, which is, I don't understand how blindness is nature's way of preserving a machine past its breaking point.
I guess maybe removing one of the senses helps if you're sort of overwhelmed.
Yeah, I kind of took it as like the brain is trying to preserve itself by shutting parts of itself off or something, like a machine might do. I don't know.
Isn't one of the symptoms of migraine really, really painful reception to light, like bright lights?
Yeah.
So maybe the blindness is like a way of shutting out the bright light and mitigating the pain.
And sound. Like you just can't hear sounds or light.
Mm-hmm.
It's really bad.
It's a weird explanation because it's not like he's going blind. It's that he has migraines and they come with blindness. He's never blind without a migraine. I mean, you know, it still sucks, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Blindness usually comes at the end, and then once the blindness clears, he's usually on the mend, and the migraine isn't really there anymore.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the last stage of his symptoms.
I wonder if it's also just. I wonder if this was just a common explanation of certain kinds of disability, like at the time. Like maybe Sibylla is just spouting a commonly understood explanation for a disability, particularly one that was mentally based.
Well, and it's super weird. It's super weird how they're all like, yeah, if he was really going blind, then we should just let him die. Which, like, y'all were friends with Kristen Stewart, remember her? She did great.
Yeah, and you liked her. Yeah, like she was pretty admired by a lot of people.
I mean, maybe it's something about the losing your sight versus growing up without it being too hard to bear, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Also, Nostradamus is pretty like the boatman. He's found the boatman, and the boatman has taken him over. Like he's dead. Just give it up. There's no coming back.
yeah.
Like
I
okay.
do like that how they keep going back to the metaphor of the river Styx though, and then bringing the river, like he's literally on the river when he does this. And yeah, and like the House of Opium is also kind of like it's a transitional space between life and death, the same way the river is.
The liminal space.
Just thinking of And She Fell.
Yes.
So then we have more explanation from Jarrett of what's going on with him, which is that he belongs to himself and is at his own disposal. We have interfered in what doesn't concern us. And then he ends that with, I read it in the wrong order, but or else what are we? So I guess it's kind of about like the integrity of the human to like determine their own fate kind of thing. And that's why Jared is offended on Lymond's behalf and now thinks that he should be allowed to choose his death. And then I love Richard's rebuttal. Richard disagrees with Jarrett, even though they're almost the same character. And he says, we are at least no less than the animals. We are members of a race and of a kingdom and of a family. The world has borrowed his strength often enough. Can we not lend him ours when he needs it? What can be done? So again, coming through at the last minute. But also, I think an interesting philosophical argument, like, do you have the right to choose your own death, or do you have an obligation to your society to live, which is the argument that Richard makes and that Sibylla uses to keep him alive.
I totally thought once Nostradamus explained that he lost a lot of blood that Richard would be like, he can have mine, let's do a blood transfusion. But I'm not actually sure if those were
a thing. I had the exact same thought, and then I'm like, wait a second, it's the 1500s. They don't do blood transfusions in the 1500s. But I did have the exact same thought. It's like, oh, someone,
like, Richard.
Yeah, Richard should donate his blood.
He can have my kidney.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't imagine anyone surviving a blood transfusion
at
that time when they didn't know about germs.
Or blood types, which is what happened when they first were doing blood transfusions.
Did they still believe in the humors then, or is this later on?
1500s?
Yeah.
I think
bile, blood.
Lasted a long time. I think that was still around.
That might have been
they were still bleeding people up
yeah.
through the 19th century. So like the idea like having an excess of blood or an excess of heat was still a thing. So, yeah.
So then our next section, we have more of Sibylla, who is mourning and upset. And she's doing penance, for she knew the sin she was paying for. She had watched his love die. She had been constrained in her fear to turn his own knife against him at Dieppe. So it's weird that she knows the sin she's paying for. She thinks she's watched his love die, which she hasn't. He hasn't stopped loving her. But like, she's doing penance for sin she knows, and yet she doesn't regret the sin. It's just kind of weird.
I mean, it kind of makes sense because it's like that idea, penance being the thing that you do. It's not necessarily about being regretful. It's about like fixing it, kind of. So like, she did a thing. She doesn't regret doing the thing because she felt it was necessary, but she will like take the punishment for it. So she'll do the penance, even though she would still do the thing. Like, she's not repentant. She's just willing to suffer the punishment for the thing that she did. Like, does that make sense?
That makes sense, actually, yeah. And then this is where Marta shows up. And Marta's initially, very Marta. And Sibylla kind of, we don't actually hear what happens, but just that Marta's eyes change and she darts forward and like helps Sibylla. Kay like sort of catches her because she's about to fall or faint, which could be, you know, physical weakness, but it's also obviously like emotional, spiritual stuff. So we know, like, even though in the scene where Sibylla wakes Lymond up and is like super badass and tough with him, we know how much she's hurting and how vulnerable she is.
I had a thought, and it was a question because I can't remember from previous books. This description of Marta where it says, beside Sibylla was the face on the pillow, save that here the eyes were open and clear, the lips rosy, the bright hair drawn out of sight beneath the hood of a traveling cloak. So it's another description of Marta, which we get all the time, of how exactly she and Francis look like each other. And if I recall correctly, throughout all the previous books, that has been used for people to just figure out they're related, right? They see Marta or they see Francis and they're like, oh, these two people look exactly alike, they're related. Have we had up to now a mistaken identity thing happen with either of them? Because I feel like their description is so exactly the same that we should have that at some point in the story.
Well, we
The
had it
very first time that Marta was introduced, Philippa thought that it was Lymond speaking, because even the quality of the voice, Philippa.
Right. Okay. I knew it had to have happened because I was like, they keep describing them as exactly the same physically. Like at some point they have to be mistaken for each other. I forgot that was the very first thing we saw. Okay.
I don't think it's happened since then, but I could be mistaken.
No, I think we get it, like, we don't get an actual mistaken identity, but we get like Jarrett thinking that Lymond's face is the same as her face, and
right.
the whole idea that like Jarrett's actually in love with Lymond, that Marta keeps going back to, but not an actual mistaken identity.
Right. Well, that's what I'm kind of wondering if like, it seems like it's a lot of descriptive setup if we don't have that at some point, and we don't have very much book left to do it, because there's just been over and over and over, we've heard so much about how they look exactly alike, you know. So
how are they ever gonna cast this if they make a movie?
Are there any twins?
I know, like twins who look exactly alike,
and one of them's playing male and one of them's playing female. They're not going to cast Lymond based on him having, the actor having like an identical twin.
Yeah, like we need someone with an identical twin that one of them can be Lymond and then one of them can just pretend they're a girl the entire story.
Maybe they could do it digitally. Every scene with Marta and Lymond in it is like the same actor playing both. No.
That would actually be kind of cool.
Yeah, Lan Wangji and his brother are supposed to be like almost identical, but not in the show.
Really?
Yeah.
They don't look like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they put like casting appropriate actors ahead of like they need to look identical.
Right. I'm definitely gonna do an Untamed rewatch when I finish this book.
It sounds like you should read the novel so that you then bring.
I know. Oh, I pre-ordered the book, by the way. I was gonna wait to get a review, and I'm like, no, I just pre-ordered it.
Just do it. Here's hoping the translation is better. Okay, so Richard and Marta come face to face finally. Unsurprisingly, she does not like him, a man who no doubt could manage a leech or a plowman, who kept his fishings and his cornfields and his coney runs, but had never touched a pen or a lute or a brush or seen an icon or a mask in the making. A man to whom the law had given all that she might have been born to, as much as the half-brother who had taken Guzel from her, Guzel who was dead. A lot going on.
Some resentment there.
Yeah. I read that and I was like, oh, that's close to the surface for her.
She's so, I don't know, she's just so damaged and so resentful. And so like snobbish about Richard, which is obviously out of defensiveness. It's obviously out of
sure,
like her own inadequacies, but
Is she aware that they were trying to keep these two apart? Like, was Marta ever told, like, please just don't
yeah, I
talk
think,
to Richard?
didn't Sibylla say to stay away from Richard?
I forget.
But Richard doesn't he seems kind of oblivious. He's not like, oh my god, my mother must have had an affair. He still seems to just be like, Gavin was screwing around.
My brother's
I
sister.
think it's Gavin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, it's interesting, like how, like you said, like disdainful that Marta is about Richard, when it's like all the things that Richard can do are actually very valuable things. He's actually really competent at the things that he does in managing mid-culture, and keeping people alive, and this whole community that depends on him but to Marta, it's just like he's not artistic, so
I mean, I think there is a lack in Richard in the sense that he is in a position to really make an impact on the political world, and he's not savvy enough to use it. But the other side of that is he's great at just being like the guy that looks after this estate and takes good care of the people.
Yeah, but Marta's disdainfulness is about him not being artistic. It's about like he doesn't write, he doesn't play the lute, he doesn't paint, he hasn't like traveled, and he hasn't seen these cultural things, and it's kind of like there are other things that are valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I get her frustration, but it's also like a sign of her lack of understanding of humanity. Like Richard's humanity is what makes him worth, the life he has. It's not about him being able to plow the fields. Like he has value because he's got a good heart. But I mean, I think it's just her specifically. Like she spent her whole life being like, I have so much passion for these things, and and I guess initially at least didn't have an outlet for it or much of one. Now she does. Now she's a merchant's wife and she gets to hang out with artists and poets all the time. But like, I guess in her childhood it was harder because she was being put to work and whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. And then she says he's not doomed to blindness if you figure out what's wrong.
And Sibylla already has it. There's one thing I haven't tried. I've been thinking about it, but I just didn't think it was the right idea to set the bed on fire. But now I'll do it.
On fire.
Hey, fire's his friend.
I've been afraid to attempt it, but I should attempt it anyway.
I've been waiting for blood. That must come next.
Yeah, what's the prophecy again, Philippe?
Fire is your friend, flood is your foe, and powder is your release. So we've got this is clearly the fire part. It wasn't the last chapter where I thought all three of them were together. Like I think this is the fire in the bed because it brings him back. It's part of what brings him back. So in the last 4 chapters, there's going to be a flood and some powder at some point. So
we'll see.
I'm still thinking powder is gunpowder, and I'm thinking he might get shot or something. But I don't want him to die. Like I hope it doesn't kill him. I don't know.
Yeah. And then there's just another sad moment here too with Marta, where she says to Sibylla that Sibylla was right. I should really never have gone back to Jarrett. Intolerance drunk is bad enough, but intolerance sober is quite insupportable. And again, it's just like he would like there's this such lost potential for the two of them, and that they have this, it's just such a frustrating relationship for us as a reader, I think, or for me as a reader, because I see them, they really could be for each other. Like Jarrett is so loyal and so, like he so wants to be devoted to someone, and like that would just be, it would be so fulfilling to him if she would just like like pick up his heart and hold it, and he would just be devoted to her, you know. And for her to have someone who is like utterly loyal to her and puts her first, which he would do, and they just, but you know, they just miss each other at every moment except those few moments at the end of Pawn. Like they just miss each other, and so here she's like, intolerance sober is quite insupportable, and it's just like, oh, it wouldn't have to be that way.
I mean, I do blame it. I guess I blame both of them. But
yeah, I blame both of them.
But I blame Jared a little bit on this one, just because he thinks she intentionally drove Philippa away, and it's like, no, she's just really bad at everything human relationship related, and she was trying to get Philippa to stay.
She's bad with people. Bad with people. Yeah, no, it's both their faults for sure. Like they're not. Neither of them is saying the thing that the other needs to hear.
Like in a way, they're also like the perfect oil and water, because she's a person who's constantly saying the most hurtful things. She can't stop herself, and he's the person who's constantly interpreting those things literally and reacting with completely over the top rage, because that's how he works. And so it's like there's a clear personality based reason why, even though if they could get over it, they'd be so perfect together, they just can't get past it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they're both really bad with people in very different ways. And those different ways are just bad for each other. But it's like the magnet, you know, like the magnets, when you put them together and if you've got them flipped wrong, then they just push apart and they can never get together. But if you just flip one of them around, they would like, that's the way it is with them.
Well, and what's interesting is that's the same relationship that Jarrett has with Lymond initially in Disorderly Nights, but they get past it because of that. I mean, the difference is Lymond is able to engage with Jared on a more mature emotional level, that innermost door thing that Jared gets to. The way that he hugs him and every so often like tells him he needs him and stuff, that like if Marta would just do that,
it would be okay.
So then we go into the liminal space, the House of Opium.
I'd love when lists like these happens where they don't give names, but like you've got to try and figure out who everybody is, which I have. So we've got his various dead that he carries with him in his house: a young vigorous man with red hair and an old man left in his blood in a bothy, Will Scott and Watt Scott.
I love that Buccleuch comes back in here, that Lymond cares enough about him that he's in this moment.
Of a henchman dragged from his horse with an arrow in him, and another darker of skin dead of fighting in a Greek courtyard, Turkey Matt and Salablanca. Although I thought it might be Ludo as well, but we don't really know how Ludo died, just that he was sort of stabbed en masse maybe in a courtyard.
Oh, I totally thought that was Salablanca.
Oh, I meant the first one.
Arrow.
Yeah, the second one's definitely Salablanca.
Oh yeah.
Dragged from his horse, that's definitely.
Yeah, dragged from his horse.
Because Ludo wasn't on the horse.
It's so long that I forgot how Turkey Matt died.
Yeah.
Of a man returning from perilous seas to drown, seeking his son near his homeland. Of a girl dying blind behind yellow silk curtains. And another burning at night in an African pavilion. Christian and Uno. And then, of course, the child, a son, an only son, playing with shells at the feet of the father who shortly would kill it. Which is not true. Lymond didn't kill him. I mean, he made the choice, but what could he have done?
I get Lymond. I'm sorry, go ahead.
He feels that way.
Yeah.
See,
He'll always blame himself.
Yeah, I get most of these I don't think are his fault, and I think he needs to just let go. But that one, I totally get why he would blame himself, even though I don't blame him. Like the fact that he had to make the choice, like you just would never forgive yourself. And I think it's very appropriate that she ends on the child. And I think it's really important because we're coming to the end of the series and like we've not consciously like processed that. I mean, we kind of have. It's been this running thread, but it's not really resolved. And so,
and I think it's also just important to remember that this will never go away. Like, it doesn't matter what happiness he finds in the future, which hopefully, or what relationships he has in the future, or even what children he has in the future. Like, this will never go away. And
can you imagine if he had children? And like, I just feel like he would be like the most overprotective, like traumatized dad. It would be a mess. It'd be great.
Kids, though. I hope he and Philippa have kids, and then she's very practical and is able to be like, let them ride the horse to the village, it's okay. Who knows?
And then in the House of Opium, we've got the Dame de Dutante shouting at him with the lines from Aucassin and Nicolette that she met him with the first time.
Sure, why not?
Or should we say Lymond and Philippa? It's probably stand-ins for Aucassin and Nicolette, right? It's a love story, correct?
It is a love story. Yeah, it's like a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, I think. Yeah.
Well, I hope it doesn't end the same way.
Yeah, that's ominous.
The lines the Dame is shouting him, Aucassin, young man, sir, I am indeed your beloved, and you do not hate me.
Okay.
Some of the lines come in later that make a lot of sense. I'll point this out.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same time where she was whispering Philippa's name in his ear over and over, correct? Or was this a different meeting?
I think that was the same time, right? When he was like kept unconscious there. Yeah, drugged.
Like hidden in the closet. And
yeah. Which, by the way, when you do reread the series, it's really interesting to go back and reread Queen's Play and be like, wow, I wouldn't have thought this scene would like have so many resonances at the end of the series.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's seeing Una and the Dom, the blonde hair and the black hair in reverse. In the nightmare, he'd been wounded and strapped to the bed. He remembered the pain as he tried to pull himself to the side. So he is like caught in that memory, and somehow that is what jogs him awake.
Mm-hmm.
And he's hearing the Dom shout, young man, sir. And then when he wakes up, he whispers in response, and the line he whispers back is, it would please me if I could arise directly. Which is from the Aucassin and Nicolette poem play.
I thought this was neat, and it's just another Dorothy Dunnett thing. But in writing, it's always interesting to see like paragraph structure. And so she's got like a long paragraph at the top of 679. She's got this long paragraph, or sort of semi. And then there's a line that's kind of set off because it's short, and it just says Francis Crawford unclosed his eyes, which is such a weird way of saying he opened his eyes that I love it. It's like he unclosed them. Which,
the default at this point is closed. So
yeah, I don't think I've ever read that as a way to say someone opened their eyes, and I just really loved it. And that it was just kind of set apart by just being this very short sentence paragraph. So, yeah, he unclosed his eyes.
I think he's also Francis Crawford through this whole thing.
Mm.
So he opens his eyes and then he shuts them again, and Sibyllus just starts slapping him.
I mean,
yeah, it works.
Sure. It happens all the time in the movies. They're always slapping people to wake them up.
Well, you gotta wake him up. His bed's on fire. You don't want him to burn.
I guess. Oh.
So what is your take on she basically just attacks him. My sickly son, my poor spirited runt of a scabbed flock. Look at me, of course, if of course you have the courage. And it goes back to that debate between Jarrett and Richard about whether he has the right to choose his own death or whether he's obligated to live for his society. And she's like, I brought you into this world and you're obligated to live.
I mean, it's just like the ultimate guilt trip. Like do you hear me? Robert Reed is dead. Gilbert Calise is dead. George Leslie is near his end, and so is James Fleming of Poison with all their sermons. You tossed them a warning and left them. Is that your whole measure to shirk what is difficult to escape? I mean, it's just like mom giving you the ultimate guilt trip in a really mean way, but yeah, like, ugh. And insulting him.
Do you think she believes it?
I don't think she believes the insults part, like the rotten stock stuff and all of that. I do think that she thinks he has responsibilities to people and that he is, I'm not sure if she goes for the whole child of destiny thing. I don't even know if she knows about that. Do we know if she knows about that?
She knows about the Dom, but yeah.
Yeah. But I do think that she thinks he has capabilities and he isn't using them, or he's not using them in the way that he should be using them. And
yeah, well, I mean, he's a huge sort of help to Scotland. He would be great for them and great influence. And he hasn't for years now.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mankind can survive very well without an intimate study of your susceptibilities, but not, unfortunately, without your other functions and talents. So mankind needs him to live so that mankind can survive, because it won't survive without him.
I mean, it's the ultimate, like, every gifted child hears this their entire childhood and adolescence, which is, you're not living up to your potential.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's the message that you get when people think you should be doing more than you are. And I feel like this entire speech is just like, you're not living up to your potential.
That's very true. It's kind of like, unless you become the president, like, you failed.
Right?
Yeah. I'm so not doing that to my kid.
Oh, bless you.
So I do have, so first of all, I love that Richard's the one going, that's unfair.
Right.
So Richard had known her, who had known her treat only 2 men with such harshness, and both of them because they had threatened the security of this, her younger son. I assume one of them is Gavin. Am I just oblivious? Who's the other one?
Richard himself? I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know either. I assumed one was Gavin too, but I wasn't sure. Was it one of the guys that was like threatening Lymond back in book 1? Did we have her being...
She did sort of threaten Dandy Hunter.
Dandy, but Richard wasn't there.
He wasn't there to see that.
He found out about it afterward. He'd known her too, and didn't necessarily see it. Maybe it was Dandy Hunter.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be Bailey, would it?
No, because Richard doesn't know about Bailey.
He doesn't know about Bailey.
Actually, I like the idea that it's a final appearance of Dandy Hunter.
No, he's still got 4 chapters to show up. Come on.
So whatever is in Lymond's eyes, which we don't get a description of it. We get a description of the reaction of others. Marta pressed her hand suddenly to her mouth, and Richard, stretching forward, took his mother hard by the arm and said, "Enough, oh, enough." So his eyes must be pretty traumatized by all this.
Yeah. I mean, she's successful. Like, she gets him to promise, and we know from the next chapter, like, he's able to function and gets up and start, so I mean, I think to Sibylla, this is a ends justify the means thing. but the means seem pretty harsh.
I mean, she's doing what she can to save her son's life. Like, she's got to get him out of the stupor that he's in. And it's not a stupor, it's a coma, basically. So, I mean, I feel like she feels like she has to go to these extremes in order to get the response that she does.
It's interesting that Marta says she shouldn't have done it. Like, even with the susceptibility, she says, like Jarrett says, it's easy to do out of hatred, but you're right. I know of no one else on earth who could have done it out of love. And Marta replies, it's a miracle, and it partook of the first property of miracles. It should never have been performed.
I think that's part of Jarrett's.
Jarrett's saying that?
Yeah, because the quote mark.
Oh, you're right. It is. The quotation isn't closed.
Yeah, it's more of Jarrett's. We should have just let him die.
Yeah. Oh, you're right.
Oh, Jarrett, come on.
But still.
But again, I'm still moved by Marta. Her face streaked and silvered with tears. I could not have done that. I fear nothing in no one. I respect nothing in no one. But I could not have done that.
Yeah.
Like there is a soul in there, and she really does feel things. She just can't communicate effectively with other human beings in any way.
She gonna have a big hero turn in the next 4 chapters, like towards the end of the. She could,
but I wonder, like, this book is not her story. Like, these books are not her story, so I feel like we've left it awfully long for her to have a big turnaround or learn a big lesson, because there's just not a lot of time left, and she's not the focus of the book. So I don't know.
I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
I would love to read. I wish I could read that, though. I'd love to read a book that was like the story of Marta's growth.
I think there's like an epic Marta fanfic on AO3.
I'm gonna say there's got to be fanfic. Yeah. Marta.
I have not dipped a single toe into the Lymond fanfic world, but I will be doing that soon.
I don't want to get your hopes up. There's not much, but there is some. But it's also really hard to write in this voice. Like, nobody can really. I also think that Sibylla was doing what had to be done, and like there's a grain of truth in it. She does probably believe, like, I raised you, you have an obligation with all your gifts and everything I gave to, keep you alive and educate you. Like, you have an obligation to do things to make the world better. But it's only a tiny part of what she really thinks. Like, she's giving it the most harsh interpretation and totally over the top, like way beyond what she doesn't think he's rotten stock.
No, not at all.
And who we've seen use this exact tact before is Francis himself. So, for instance, it's for a different reason. It's for when he's trying to get Austen to kill him, the way he goes completely over the edge and says just the absolute worst things about Philippa. But he's doing it to try and drive home his point and get a response. And Sibylla's doing almost the exact same thing, but for a different reason here. So.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. Like, her entire goal is to save Lymond here. It's not to, like, I think the shaming him into Scotland and like all of that stuff is just secondary to the goal, which is get him out of bed and all of that. So
it's interesting because she knows him better than anyone else, and she's been sitting by his bedside probably telling him, I love you, I need you, or whatever. But like, this is what she knows is gonna work, is this like playing on his sense of like self-hatred and guilt and obligation. And she's right.
She didn't want to do. Like, she didn't want to do it, but she had like one thing that might work, and this was it.
Which is really interesting that that's what works. It's not your family needs you and loves you. It's you have an obligation to like make the world better.
Yeah.
An obligation to make the world better, and to me, you promise me for one thing, anything I ask, and the one thing I ask is come back, live.
And this is like a point of pride for him. He holds his promises, and she knows it.
Unless he's released from them.
Although, well, okay, Philippa did release him the second time. She did not release him the first time that he tried to kill himself, but whatever. Okay, should we move on to chapter 9?
Chapter 9.
Okay. So Lymond survives and has a scene where he somewhat reconciles with Sibylla, although their relationship will never be the same. He talks to his men. They decide to go back to Scotland with him, including Jarrett, who is leaving Marta. And they're going to travel ahead while Lymond goes back together with Richard. Lymond has an intense conversation with Marta, which we will break down when we get there. Danny decides to stay behind at the last minute when he hears that Marta is going to that house in Blois to investigate a secret room of the Dame du Tance's house. Charles V dies. The Scottish commissioners head home. Lymond meets with the French king and some of the courtiers and tells them that he is going back to Scotland. After mentioning the poisoning, so kind of very subtly telling them why, and saying he's going to like live privately in Scotland as a private citizen. When Lymond and Richard leave, they are intercepted by the Cardinal's men, Cardinal de Guise, who take them to him, and he basically says, I have all this circumstantial evidence that you're a Protestant rabble-rouser, and if you don't leave France immediately and never come back, I'll have you killed, and if you ever step foot in France again, I'll have you killed. And then we end with the Cardinal sending a letter to Margaret Lennox.
Dun, dun, dun.
Making way for her appearance in the next 4 chapters.
Yes, definitely Margaret Lennox is coming back.
So right off the bat, the king and the Duke de Guise and the Cardinal visit Lymond, and they're just full of, I mean, the king, I guess he knows, but like the Cardinal and the Duke are just full of hypocrisy of like, oh, it's so sad about the illness and the Scottish commissioners. Let's pray for them.
Hopes and prayers.
And then thoughts on this convo with Sibylla. He asks her what his father was like, and she says, like you.
Yeah.
I was really hoping she'd just tell the entire story right here.
So
but I guess we're not allowed to know it yet. Not quite.
Yeah,
yet.
I was really hoping we were going to get like, and here's all the things that you want to know. But
the reason I married Gavin is.
Yeah. Like,
because of his hot bod.
No. Not the reason.
I
Oh gosh, I reject that interpretation. Yeah. I do like that Lymond was like, but you loved my father, and Eloise's, of course. What was he like? So like, he does understand her a little bit there.
But he asked her if it was worth all of this. And she says, yes, don't you of all people know what love can do? I don't know that Lymond would do this to his kid for Philippa, but
yeah.
Well, I guess he did technically kind of kill his kid for Philippa. But
yeah.
Also interesting that she says, don't you of all people know what love can do? So she knows the depth of his love for Philippa now, I guess.
He did not want to pursue that.
Yeah. The silence lasted a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's only recently learned about that because I don't think he's ever truly loved anyone before Philippa. Not in the deep,
Not in a romantic way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I do like the ambiguity. Like when he was 60, did he think he was in love with Margaret Lennox? Like obviously he wasn't, but did he mistake that infatuation for being in love?
I mean, don't we all sort of fall in love
We
a
all
little
do that, right?
when we're in teenagers? It's like, oh, They paid attention to me. I'm so in love with them.
It's so epic. Like the love that you're in when you're 14 and 15 is like epic love, you know.
We shall never be parted.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that Sibylla, how often have I called her Philippa? Many times. Sibylla, he says something about like his unwillingness to accept responsibility, referencing his suicidal ideation. And she says, "You're right to die. They accept that already. It is I who do not." And so it's like Sibylla is taking like all the responsibility for forcing him back to the living and all of that. And so I like that about her, that she wasn't, you know, it wasn't like, yeah, we all decided, or like everyone was fighting for you, or no, it's like I did it. I did this to you. Blame me, kind of thing.
Well, and she also says that whatever touched your honor has been set right with those who heard it. So like she went to them afterward and was like, that was a bunch of crap. I mean,
Right.
not all of it, but like
Right.
the rotten stock thing and whatever.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. She's like, I didn't mean it. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like basically it's like, I didn't mean it except the part where I do think you have an obligation to live.
Right.
And then his response is really interesting because he talks about the night that you know, she sent him to the Hotel de Spheres to find Philippa, and he says that night it must have been hard for you, almost as hard as it was for Philippa. Which is interesting that his response is to show an empathy for Sibylla. Like, Lymond, it was hard for you too. Certainly worse for Philippa than for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and then she has an interesting response, I think, to his like, sometimes I wonder if I only exist to be sacrificed to, because we've seen him struggle with this like multiple times throughout the book, you know, that he feels guilty because other people die for him or because other people sacrifice for him. And her response to that isn't like, it's not your fault, or you didn't make them do it, or somebody else is responsible. Like, she doesn't say that. She says, if you accept sacrifices, you must respond with acts of reparation, which to me sort of reads as like the exactly right thing to say, because he's not going to accept it's not your fault, you know, or he's not going to accept, he doesn't believe that, you know, because it's so entrenched in who he is that these people sacrifice for him. And so she says, okay, they do. What are you going to do about it? You know? And I thought that was really good. Yeah.
Isn't there something in the last scene with Christian about how she sacrificed to get these papers, and like she asked him like, don't waste my sacrifice. It's something like that.
Yeah.
And so then every time he tries to kill himself, it's like you're wasting the sacrifice of the people who died for you.
Yeah.
Many people that have died for you.
Yeah. So he needs to live with these like acts of reparations and like paying people back for their sacrifice by living and being the person that he could be, and all of that.
I don't know if I personally believe that. Like, I do kind of lean toward like, you have the right to decide your own destiny, and just because other people do something doesn't mean you're obligated to respond in turn if you didn't ask for it or agree to anything.
Right.
But there's also a level of like, you know, Christian died for you. Like, even if you don't have I don't know, even if you're not obligated to live for that, like, you probably should anyway. Try to do something worthwhile.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you about people have autonomy and they have the right to like decide their own destiny. But I think in terms of like a message that would make it through to Lymond, for him to hear it and make a difference in how he lives his life, like Sibylla gives him the right message in terms of for the outcome that she wants. Like, this is the message that would actually reach him, I think.
I think she does believe it though, but I think it's also like, she's his mother. She's literally like, I bore you out of my body. Like, I don't accept that you have the right to like not live the life that I gave you. Which, I mean, that's what moms are like.
Sure.
I get it. Okay, so actually, then I think the interesting thing, one of the other interesting things in this conversation is, um, he's saying the blindness might be gone. If so, I can fight again. And she says, "Do you want to?" And he's surprised, and he says, "Don't you want me to?" Um, and then she's like, it's not the sword that we need, it's you. And he's like, we, and she says 500,000 people. So again, this idea that this goes back to the cockfight at the beginning and all these debates with like Austen about war and whether war is necessary and worthwhile and noble and stuff. And it goes back to like the purpose of Lymond's life and how his attempt to make a difference in the world is through war and being a mercenary and being the head of the Russian army. And like, I just love this like implication that he thinks that's how he's supposed to impact the world. And she's like, and the way he's like, she's like, do you want to? And he's like, don't you want me to? Like, it didn't occur to him.
Yeah. Well, and she's like, if there are swords, then I suppose you must wear yours. But it's like this, well, I guess if you have to, that's, you can, but that's not what I mean. Yeah. And then he smiles.
I think this has been his struggle, like his whole life is one of his primary struggles is like, how do I make a difference in the world? I'm obligated to do so. How can I do it? I have to do it through war. And he thinks that's the way, but he's miserable. So he's always being like torn apart, living this life of this person he isn't. Like that moment with Jarrett, where Jarrett's like, "You love this" in book 3 when they're riding, with like the mercenary army, and Lyman's like, "No, like I hate this. I miss music and talking to people." Like he's trying to be someone he's not, and she's finally like in this moment, kind of like gives him permission to be himself again, and that's okay, and he can be of value to the people of Scotland by like being a fully realized person and not just a warrior.
Yeah.
Didn't Philippa say something on the opposite end of the spectrum though? At the beginning of this book, after the chase through the streets, she was like, or maybe it wasn't the chase through the streets. It was one of the moments they were having a lot of fun, or was it the revels? I forget.
When she says, "This is who you should be."
Yes.
But that's about being silly and playing games.
Yeah.
And like
that was about
going,
fighting.
That was
No,
about,
but she's saying the opposite. Like, this is what you should be instead of being a soldier.
right, that you should be playing and theatrical. So she's like agreeing, like be a,
Yeah, no, I think she and Sibylla are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's true. Like, both of them see this person. I mean, Philip is even like, he's not a machine, It's like the warrior version of him acting like a machine. And Philip is like, that's not who he is. Who he should be is this playful, silly person. And even what Sibylla is saying, it's not about the playful, silly side, but it's about, like being a fully realized person.
Yeah. It's like who you are as Francis is what people need, not the single aspect of you that's the warrior.
Well, and even if you look at how he impacted the Scottish situation in this book, it wasn't through fighting, it was through talking to people, paying attention, his spy network, warning people, being a voice of like moderation and helping guide the commissioners, helping guide Mary. Like, that's what they need, is his wisdom, not his sword.
Yeah.
And so then he says, "It seems we're not meant to be estranged," and kisses. And it's very lovely. But then we end with how it's never going to be the same, which I don't know why she realizes in that moment it'll never be the same, because it seems kind of lovely, but I guess there's something still missing that they had before.
I mean, he kisses her on the cheek, and it's just not the same.
He kisses her on the cheek, and then he starts talking about Jarrett. Maybe that's the red flag. I don't know. But I don't know exactly what makes her come to that realization, but I actually quite like it, because it would be too easy if they were just like, everything's fine again. There's always going to be this, she did hurt him and he did hurt her, and there's this rift that wasn't there before.
There are consequences.
Yeah. But they still love each other and they're reconciled, which is good because she's not going to live much longer.
Then we get the guys talking about the future, which this is a great conversation.
And so Lymond's whole justification here for going back to Scotland to the men is that he's going to fight the De Guises from there.
Sure. I love Danny's. It's a moot point, naturally, but which side will we be fighting for? It's like none of them care. They're just like, point us in a direction. We'll go that way.
But I do like this. Like, I think we're being asked to fight for a nation. It's like it doesn't matter about the religious squabbles. What matters is protecting the people, doing what's best for like the people of Scotland.
Well, and Archie's so insightful when he's like, there are 20 sides in the fight, never mind 2. You know, and when they get tired of throwing things at each other, they'll turn and stamp on the mediator. And so you need us, you know, but yeah, like it's going to be a mess. Like it's going to be a huge mess. And
well, and I think what's also interesting is like Lymond isn't giving up on the mercenary army thing, but it's like it's more like he's accepting that that's not all there is or something. Because he does say like we tried once before, if you remember, to give Scotland a strong arm and a voice of reason, but Graham Mallet destroyed them. There will be others like him. So it's the strong arm and the voice of reason going together.
Yeah.
And it's much more about a peacekeeping, like Seymour's was always like a peacekeeping force, not a like, let's go win our glory by attacking people kind of thing.
Yeah. And then Jarrett, it's just like, it's curiosity, isn't it, that's taking you all? Is there a man of belief left among us? It's just so, he's like so black and white. I love it.
I guess presumably like Jarrett, having been a Knight of St. John, is with the Catholic side and Scotland's going toward the Protestant. But then Lymond says, what if there was? Are you suggesting it should affect his behavior?
Yeah.
Jarrett then turns red. Then you don't want my services, but he does, of course.
Yeah. And then obviously Lymond's been assuming that he's going to stay in France with Marta and his business. And Jarrett's like, nope, I'm going with you.
Talk about flip-flopping though. Jarrett and Marta, like, it's hard for me to take it seriously. Like, he's leaving her this week.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's, I mean, it goes back to our whole, like, Jarrett's really in love with Lymond, is the thing that is the breaking point with Marta is that she hurt Lymond. Like Marta makes his wife leave France. And so Jarrett is like, nope, I'm done with her because she did this horrible thing to Lymond. And that was it.
This is not only that, but I'm done with her and I'm going off with Lymond.
Right. I'm done with her and I'm going off with Lymond. Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm very Catholic, but I'll go fight with his army that may end up on either side.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm following this guy.
Well, and Danny kind of also says it about the men. Like, we only came because you were coming. So yeah, they're just there for him.
Yeah. And I mean, Jarrett does have this kind of bleak realization where he says, if you never met again, your marriage would stand in the same way that mine never existed. I won't come running back. So he's just like, he doesn't see any hope at all. And it's like, there never was any, and it was all a lie.
So Archie's going to help Lymond pack, but not come with him because Lymond has chosen to go home with his brother. Thoughts on why Lymond chooses Richard to be his companion home?
He needs Richard to see sort of what happens next when they go to court. Like, he needs him to be aware of the situation, so he sees it firsthand.
it could also be that he's a little nervous about what the DeGees are gonna do to Richard, and like he feels like Richard is safer with him than going back alone. I kind of want it because I mean the DeGees have showed no compunction in arranging it. Like the idea that they would arrange an accident or something. Like obviously they wouldn't poison him because that would, you know, that's that would be too obvious. But you know, horseback riding accident, roving marauders, you know, whatever.
He does talk later about how he's trying to protect Richard because there's the line about like how Richard's helping him walk and he's like, I'm the one that's supposed to be protecting you.
I do, before we get to the Richard part though, I do want to say I had a little moment where I wish that we had had more of Fergie in the story because I loved his little bit about where he says Jarrett says something about the poisonings and you know, failing proof they get off with murder, meaning the DeGees, and Fergie is like, failing proof, anybody Sorner, Overlayer, or Cardinal can get off with murder, and if you want to suggest otherwise, you'll have me to contend with. You're tied unless you want to. So he's just like, you gotta have proof or you can't convict people, and I'm gonna die on that sword. You're like, oh, Fergie, I was very adamant.
He's got a lot of those little things in Disorderly Nights when he's around more. Yeah.
So I was just like, oh, I kind of missed him. And
he's a
Fergie also gives Archie the opener for, I think, one of the best lines Archie has ever uttered in this series of books. When he says, "What about it, Archie? No elephants." "They'll not have noticed," said Archie. "But there haven't been any elephants since Stamboul, and I've had that many backsides in my face since that I've never missed them."
Yeah.
Archie.
Yeah. It's like he's just adopted a different menagerie.
Yep.
Takes care of.
Yeah. And he's like, I don't know, he's like one of those dogs that adopts baby ducklings or something, you know? He can't help his maternal instinct despite him being this like craggy old guy.
Yeah. He's just got to take care of people.
He must be Cancer too, in the Zodiac.
Oh, maybe.
That's what we do. Cancers are very mothering.
What do you know?
Well, Philippe is a Cancer. We know that.
Wonder what Sibylla is. I think I remember an interview with Dunnett where she talks about Archie and Sibylla having a rapport because like Archie is basically the only mother figure that Lymond allows, and that Sibylla probably appreciates that he's got someone mothering him. Okay, there's this very brief exchange with James Stewart and John Erskine and Lymond, where we just get the emphasis again on the importance of Lymond to the Scottish nation. Come naked of creed or of kind or even of purpose, but bring with you what Orkney saw all those years ago. We are too small a nation to be able to spare saints to Rome or Geneva or any other refugees seeking to glorify either the flesh or the spirit. There is no one to understand us except ourselves.
Yeah.
This is interesting to me just because I obviously don't come from a small country that is less powerful than a lot of others, and so this idea of like to me patriotism has always been such a dark dominating thing.
Yeah.
This idea that it can be, you know, about like kind of protecting the smaller nation, I like a lot better.
Yeah, it's interesting if you grew up in the United States and are our age, which are like children of the 70s and the 80s, like for a lot of us, like patriotism is a really like negative thing. It's a really dark and violent thing, and we don't like it. and so the idea of like devotion to country is in a lot of ways seen as like it's not a thoughtful stance. It's almost an ignorant stance. Like I don't know,
like a bullying stance. Like it's a power thing.
Yeah, it's about power and about like individualism at the expense of others, and this weird group think about, it's like group think but individualist. It's very weird.
It's a way of sort of not only bully, but it's a way of sort of separating you from the other and making the other seem less than.
Yeah.
And be like, we're better than everybody else, and so
Yeah.
we can do whatever we want.
Right. And it's like the stance of a bully, which the three of us obviously reject. and so patriotism by connection becomes this thing that is deeply uncomfortable and not something to be valued, really. And so yeah, it is interesting having read all of these books and have this sense of like a homeland that you're loyal to and devoted to and all those things. It's really interesting.
Well, and that patriotism can be about like
The good of others.
Yeah, about like you said, it's so individualistic here that it could be about, putting others above yourself. And even in that speech, though, at the end of Game of Kings, like, it's certainly not an unambiguously good thing. Like, he talks about all the dark sides of it, even in that context.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just so distracting.
Hello, kitties.
Just went right in the spot my computer was in, and now I can't put it. Here we go. Okay.
She's looking straight at the camera.
She stuck her butt in the camera.
Oh well. Anyway, Marta is next.
Marta. Yes. Okay. So Marta's kind of really nutty here about the Dame de Détente and all this prophecy stuff.
Yeah.
And she's talking about like Jarrett has a place in the pattern, and Lymond says so that if there is a pattern, you are not entrusted with it. So this idea that like they're still following the Dame de Détente's pattern, and Marta thinks she knows everything, but she doesn't.
All I could think of when they started talking about the pattern was the Wheel of Time. And I was just like, oh my goodness. But yeah, I thought it was interesting first.
I said the wheel weaves as the wheel wills.
That's right. I thought it was interesting, like the next thing he says though, like it, so that if there's a pattern, you are not entrusted with it, it might be as well to remember that. And it's like almost this warning or this advice that he's giving her. It's like, hey, this isn't your responsibility. It's not your thing. And she just doesn't, she's not hearing it.
Well, and she's just very like obsessive about like, it's a little bit later on 691. You spoke to her, her eyes alight. You spoke to her on the night of the fire. What did she say? Like, she's obsessed still with the Dom and what the Dom's plans were. And it's like, this wasn't healthy for you, Marta. Like, let it go.
Yeah, and she ignores, like, his voice holds a warning, and she ignores it and just like plows right through, Yeah. You spoke, you were not speaking to Una, were you? You were speaking French. And then, yeah.
It's also interesting. I didn't understand this, but maybe I just missed something. It's at the top of 690 after Lymond says, so that if there is a pattern, you are not entrusted with it, it might be as well to remember that. Martha's reply is, it moves from vessel to vessel. You know that very well. What does she mean by it moves from vessel to vessel?
I thought it was that they're just different people who are entrusted with different parts of it. So like the Dom, like Philippa had her role to play, and Lymond has his role to play, and Gazelle had her role to play, and all that. That's how I took it, but that could be wrong.
It might be, I guess. Yeah, vessel to vessel, kind of carrying out the prophecy. And like maybe there's some aspect of Marta that's like, brainwashed by the Dom to believe that the purpose of her life was to be this vessel of prophecy. And now that that's over for her, she can't let it go. Because this was the identity she was given as a child or something.
This, like, your mother lied to me. She let me think that you and I were the children of Gavin Crawford and the Dom Dudutance's daughter. We're only half related. And then Lymond says, we do each other nothing but harm. You know that. And then she gets upset at that when he says that. And she's like, did I do you harm at Volos? And yeah.
That makes me really sad because, again, like, there really was a real connection there. She was crying, like, in the previous, chapter. Like, she cares. And she has these human needs for relationships and family and stuff. And Lymond is just like, I think he's just like Jared is just like done with her.
Yeah. I mean, you see it here where she says, what have you brought back from Dorlan? Something your uncouth family won't know how to handle. And then his reply is, you hate them, don't you? Lymond said, how uncouth do you think you appeared to Gazelle? So he stabs her where she is vulnerable with that, but it's because she stabbed him where he was, like, she's like your uncouth family. And so he replies with, well, how uncouth did you look to Gazelle? And it's very sibling like, honestly, but it's just so hurtful. And they can't, it's not siblings who have a foundation of love for each other. Like, if they had years of living together and interacting together, then they could do this kind of thing and survive it, but they don't. And
there's also a part of me that, like, as a person reading a book, I have a lot of empathy for Marta because I see her damage and I see her need and her longing and her tragedy. But as Jarrett or Lymond or anyone that had to interact with her for an extended period of time, there is a certain point when a person is abusive that you need to get them out of your life because they're hurting you, and it doesn't matter that they're suffering too. Like, you have to protect yourself. Your patience is going to run out, and you have to, like, draw some boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So also, this is where Lymond tells us that he believes the Dom is indeed watching us from her grave.
She's certainly whispering enough.
Yeah.
And that he believes he is condemned to spend the rest of his life under her patronage. But I don't think he's like, yay, happy, going home to Scotland, gonna live happily ever after. He's like, I guess I have to keep going and be under the control of this dead witch.
Okay, so what is this thing? I can understand about 3/4 of this passage, but I'm missing some of it just because of the Old English or the Middle English of it.
Okay, let me look.
It's like, I gave the gate, was never gone. I found the thing, was never found. I saw under a tree bowing, and lo, a
free man lying bound.
Okay.
And dumb man heard I full loud speak, and dead man heart I sing. How long should I keep going? This goes on for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, just the part that's like, I found the thing, was never found.
Oh, so it's a traditional ironic Scots narrative on the perfidy of women.
Okay.
You spoke to her the night of the fire. What did she say? And he tells a story about the perfidy of women.
Okay.
Or sings an old Scottish poem about it or whatever.
Yeah, so he does not seem to think that the Dom is all seeing and all knowing, even though she is sort of watching over them from the grave. He's not thrilled about it.
Or he thinks she's devious and manipulative and evil.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And she certainly manipulated enough events in his life.
She seems that way. And this is interesting. I thought this was so sad, where Marta says, she's smiling. It is not yet finished then. I thought not. How could it be? How could it be after all I've done? And so just this, like, her desperate need, I read that bit as like Marta's desperate need for her life to have meant something, and like everything that she's done and everything she's gone through and everything she's sacrificed and everything she hasn't had, like everything that's been denied her, she's like, there's still a purpose to it, like, you know, it's like desperately longing for her life to have meaning. And this is what she holds on to for the meaning of her life, is the Dom's weird prophecy plan. And like, oh, so sad.
Yeah, and I mean, it just makes sense being raised in that house with that
Mhm.
crazy
Absolutely.
mom.
Yeah.
And then Lyman, there is no end, there is no rest, there is no answer, which is kind of his like, I'll keep going, but and then they're looking at a chess set, bringing us very full circle. And she says, there are not many pieces now left on the board. Who is your opponent? Myself. Who else? Lyman said. Which I think is extremely relevant to this book, because who is the villain of this book? We've got a bunch of like little villains, but the real villain is like Lyman's internal struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she asked, how do you take leave for all time of a brother? So like this is their, what she at least believes is their final goodbye. And he gives her understanding and pity and fellowship. And then, but she's not satisfied, and she asks, Lord, is there nothing in the cup for me? While you were drinking, I was singing to you. And he shakes his head. So he is giving her something, but it's not enough. It's not what she wants from him.
Yeah. And I love that it says like the detachment had gone from his face, but not the strength. So he's engaged with her, and he cares about her, but he can't give her what she wants him to.
I mean, imagine they tried to like adopt her and take her home to Mid-Coulter and like make her part of the family. She'd drive everyone nuts. They'd all hate each other. It would
be terrible.
There's just too much resentment from her for that to work.
And it is really sad because like Sibylla wanted to take her as a baby, and it would have been completely different if she had.
Yeah.
And you could see like Sibylla could have loved her. This is the child of this man that she loved and lost. And like, I'm sure there'd be the bitterness of her being the child of someone else, but at the same time, it's part of that lost love who, you know, she put above all others.
And if she describes Lymond as, you know, when he says, what was my father like? And she says, you, then that means Marta is also a reflection of him.
Sure.
Would be like that. It's more of Francis the First that is in Marta than like the Dom's daughter. You almost never like, it's like she's a non-entity. That, so yeah.
I do think you see the Dom. We don't know anything much about Beatrice, but we see the Dom and Marta in this ruthlessness, and yeah.
And then Archie's like, good riddance.
Yeah, I like that little trick there. Marta turned and walked from the room. And good riddance, said Archie grimly.
Yeah.
Even completely different scene.
I know, but it was a nice little touch.
And so then we get the whole sort of thing about how Marta's going to Blois, which, why does this inspire Danny to stay behind to go see what she's doing? Look in the closet of the house.
I don't know. I love Archie's like, Danny's like, I'm gonna go run a little errand, keep Jared happy. And Archie's like, yeah, shall I tell him right away that you're with his wife or wait until later?
Danny ran off with Marta.
Yeah. They're just, I love all their interactions. Like the guys, they're just so Danny like whacks at Archie and Archie ducks, you know. they're just so funny.
And then Archie's pissed at Nostradamus for not reading his palm. I offered him
Yeah.
my recipe book even.
He wouldn't so much as look at the lines of my life. That's no way to give a man confidence in his future. Oh, Archie.
We do have a line on the next page also about Archie, which is that Archie's going back with Sibylla. And Archie, in his time, had served all the Crawfords. So here's an implication that he had served Sibylla before Lymond, which I don't think we knew before.
Or Francis the First. Like,
right, that's sort of implied too, right?
Yeah, like I sort of had this headcanon, which is obviously not supported in the book, but I sort of had this headcanon that like Archie was like a stable boy at Francis the First's estate, and like, you know, got into animals and served him, and then just kind of stuck with the family the whole time or something.
Maybe that's how he ended up a Scot in France.
Yeah.
And then traveling the world.
Something, you know, who knows?
Dee, this is the fanfic you need to write after we finish. The Life of Archie.
Oh my gosh.
So then this is where Lymond and Richard go to visit the king, and I like the descriptions because it's like we've been around these like real solid people with integrity, and then we go to this court where the Duke de Guise is like drawing on the royal hose, like kneeling down, you know, just everything's fake and everything's kissing ass and everything's gross. And it's just like, ew, you know, like, of course Lymond doesn't want to be around these people and shouldn't be around these people.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get Richard like watching all of this, you know, like Richard's with Lymond, he's just like watching him interact with all these people in his political situations. And then there's the bit where it says, watching his brother among them, Coulter could pick out I'm going to butcher this, Mignon de Couchet, I don't know, the Vidame, blah, 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 the Prince of Condé, the Prince, blah, 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 whose interest in Francis Crawford over the years had not been impersonal. And you're like, okay, Richard's definitely picking up on all of that.
I mean, I can't blame them for that one, but
no. It's just funny. I just imagining Richard like in this court going, yep, that one slept with my brother, and that one slept with my brother, and that one was fighting with him in the like, that was a fighting companion, that was a fighting companion, that's when he slept with, you know, just like, oh.
I mean, you just get this feeling of how Lymond has been like flailing among these people that he shouldn't be wasting time on, like kind of through his whole life. And like, you know, I think you guys said before, like, I wish he'd go back to Scotland, and it's like that's where the real solid relationships and people and everything was. And he's just been trying to turn himself into something he's not. And like that, and that's like the whole series is him like trying to figure out who to be and like never quite getting there.
Yeah. Still 4 chapters.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll get there.
So yes, we have this whole thing with the king, like, oh, it's so great to have you back. And then Lymond's like, you know, my brother's colleagues at Dieppe were among the unfortunate. So like referring to the Scottish commissioners as my brother's colleagues, like, hey, you hurt my family and people we care about, and then saying like, and I'm leaving, which is like all super polite, but makes it very clear why he's going.
And just incredibly risky, like him coming into, like, I was reminded, you know, like Lymond coming into the king and saying this, this isn't exactly analogous, but it really reminded me of like Esther coming before like Artaxerxes in the Bible, where she's like, I'm gonna go talk to the king. If I perish, I perish. You know, and it's this wonderful, like brave incredibly brave act with absolutely no guarantee of success. And so Lymond comes into the king, and like the king could be like, no, you're under arrest, you know, or like this could be completely unsuccessful, but he wants to go home and has promised his mother. So
I mean, he threw a bowl at the last guy that pissed him off and then threw him in jail.
yeah, like, I mean, the odds the king this could have gone a different direction. Like it really could have.
I do think that Lymond has a pretty solid idea of how to play the situation and a pretty solid idea of how the king's going to respond, because he knows exactly what to say to flatter him and smooth it over. So I don't think, I think the bigger risk he's taking is more the de Guise retaliation. I think that's where the real danger is, more so than the king even.
Yeah, but I think the de Guise, like the de Guise's retaliation could be like he doesn't know what they've said up to this point, you know. So yeah, I agree. He knows the king and he knows what to say to the king, but kings are kings, and this one's kind of capricious, and you just never know.
I think he actually has a pretty good standing when he says, "I contracted to stay in France for a year, and I have done so. I beg now to be allowed to leave the light of your presence," because like they did have a deal, and he did keep his end of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I don't know. He's just been playing this court so long, and he's so politically savvy that I think he can manipulate Henri. But
what does he say, the king, when he says goodbye, my companion? I think.
Yeah, I was gonna translate that.
Go with God or something. I can.
Where's that? Here we go.
701. Adieu, mon confrère.
I think that's goodbye, my friend. Let's see. A-D. Ugh, damn it, it's not in here. Probably because it's not a quote.
Oh, okay. So it's like goodbye, my friend. Something good. I don't know.
Let's see if Google Translate app can translate it live.
Yeah.
This may not work.
Yeah, the Duke de Guise is sure trying hard to be like, he's going back to Scotland to raise an army. But
yeah, I mean, he doesn't want. Yeah, they certainly would like Lymond to die at this point.
Yeah. I love Lymond's like, my mother's not young, I'm gonna go home, and the Duke is like, to do what? To spend a lifetime at your sewing?
Here we go. Google Translate God.
God grants you a long life.
Goodbye, my friend. God grants you a good and long life.
Yeah.
See?
Know enough of Spanish to look at the French and kind of figure it out. So.
Yeah. I think that's why like Lymond knows he can get there with Henri, because Henri likes him.
A little surprised. One of the things Henri like tried to woo him back to court with was like, M. de Nemours will challenge you again to ride up the Palais de Justice steps and down them as well. It's like, do you remember that the first time he tried that, he almost died?
It's like, that was not a good memory.
No, that was different stairs, right?
Well, it was?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Tower something stairs.
The Cour de Minime or whatever.
Oh, well, still.
So riding horses downstairs is not a good thing to do.
It is also funny how after all the like, you betrayed me in Queen's Play, which maybe that's also why Lymond knows the king's not going to kill him, because he let him live after Toddy Boy. Now the king is like, play the lute with us and whatever. So again, just going back to the theme of a lot of this, 699 to 700, the Duke de Guise asks why he's going back to spend a lifetime at your sewing. What career is there for a nobleman and a man of honor except war? That is our question.
So many things. So many things.
They just really don't understand that you can have a fulfilling life without these aspects to it. Like these rich, honorable, powerful men do not understand. They can't contemplate being happy with your life in the absence of these things.
Well, and I think Laura brought up such an excellent point, like last time we talked before that, about how this is so business today. Like it's exactly the same today. I mean, maybe these people aren't waging war, although some of them are, but just that you have to conquer and you can never rest. Like this idea of like, I'm going to go home and rest and be with my family, and like that's not valued in among the rich and powerful, and that there's the people who have the most ability to live a life like that do it the least. You know, and money becomes just keeping score. You know, probably like land was just keeping score back then. It's like who controls the most land and all that.
Yeah,
and
look at
now
these billionaires can be
yeah,
competing with each other to be like multi and
billion,
have,
blah blah blah.
have more zeros at the end, and it's like,
Yeah,
what's the why?
right. Yeah,
To be the first in space.
yeah. There's literally no point to it except one-upmanship. Like that's the only reason to have all those zeros, is like that you have more zeros than the next guy's zeros, and oh, it's so gross.
Yeah, and the idea that like you could just try to make the world a better place and help people rather than
Yeah.
sending yourself into space or whatever.
Yeah.
I do like also the war is ending, which is Lymond's response, but the war is ending, which is like there's more than that. There's more than war. And then like you said, like De Guise is like, I don't see how you could exchange the majesty of France for this little tiny nation of Scotland. And then Lymond's snarky, I exchanged Russia for France.
Yeah. 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 And I did also love that Richard's like acknowledging Lymond's sort of political savvy. Of course, you knew when you made that promise to Philippa that this was what it would mean. And Lymond's like, so did Sibylla. Do you think she's a novice in the way of courts? It could have been much worse. So because he'd promised his mother, he was able to say, I promised my mother. And she knew that he would be able to say that, you know, to give him the cover to say that by making him promise. So
that is a good point. I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. That is it. All right. So then we move on to Lymond immediately being intercepted. And it's these men not wearing livery. And Lymond says, I'll go with you, but only if I have an escort supplied by the Cardinal of Lorraine. And they're like, we are from the Cardinal of Lorraine. And he's like, nonetheless, I want the ones with the livery.
yeah, because I want people to know where I am and who I'm with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like, this is the danger. Like, this could have turned into like Lymond just being killed quietly, probably. Or it could have been Lymond accused of being a Protestant rabble rouser and executed publicly. He just barely makes out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things he says is like, basically threatens like, if you kill me quietly, you'll make a martyr out of me. So he's like, if you know, what then would you recommend for a man who purloins the soul of a nation? And Lymond's reply is a hearing. Like, you have to do this publicly. And of course, the Duke de Guise doesn't want to do it publicly because Lymond's beloved. And so.
I also like the way, it was not the Duke, it's the Cardinal.
Or the Cardinal. Yeah.
The Cardinal is introduced because we've been spending most of our time hearing about the Duke, who's kind of like not the most adept. He's
right.
He's bad, but like he's kind of dumb. But then we find out that Charles de Guise, who we've barely seen, he's the second of the beautiful princes and the cleverest and the most dangerous. So this is the dangerous one. This is also the one that Lymond impersonated, which he is not happy about.
Oh, I was about it now.
And the way he knows is that ring, which, if you remember, Lymond gave that ring to was it the servant that was helping them or something? Like, whatever happened to this person that helped them from the university, that helped them escape, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the ring has been found by the cardinal, like this.
The son of the professor or something?
Yeah, like this kid probably got interrogated or killed or something. Like, this yeah, and then I do enjoy how like all this random stuff that's happened throughout the book has now been strung together by the cardinal to like be this whole Protestant conspiracy thing. So like if we remember that Lymond stayed with the widow Bouchard and that those writings from Knox were on the table, it's like, oh, Knox stayed there too, and clearly you were conspiring, and you know, just all this stuff that has nothing to do with Lymond because he's not actually a Protestant rabble-rouser. And then the sad reveal that Strozzi invited all those people most likely to lay the groundwork to discredit Lymond.
See.
But I don't know that he was like...
I'm not a Strozzi fan.
Yeah, I don't know that he was like actively going to discredit him, but I feel like he was like laying the groundwork, like, if I need to, I have this.
Yeah.
Just power politics.
Yeah. Which is again like, oh God, get out of France.
Mm.
Yeah, get out of France.
Never return.
And then yeah, so I just love how Lymond is like, you know, here's why you can't have me killed right now. Here's why you have to give me a hearing. And then the cardinal's like, you have to stay away from Mary, Queen of Scots. And Lymond's like, oh, I'm already meeting with her. Do you want me to tell her that you told me not to go? And the cardinal's like, oh, I guess you should go see her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of thought on Lymond's behalf. He knew exactly what was going to happen in this meeting, so he was prepared for it.
Yeah, and Gray tried to warn him.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Gray.
Yeah, we like him
ally ever.
Like, weird. We like him now. So I think it's interesting though. The cardinal sends a letter to the Countess of Lennox at the end of this chapter, but Lymond is not going immediately home. He's gonna stop in Paris and like see the Queen and all of that, and it makes me nervous because it means the letter is gonna get to England before he and Richard do. So like if he'd left immediately, maybe it wouldn't have. Not good, not good, not good.
One of the other things I find interesting here is the way that alliances have shifted, so that we end the exchange with the Cardinal de Guise. He's saying, you know, I have a long arm to like reach into Scotland and get you. And Lymond says, Monsieur, you have no arm at all unless England allows you a sleeve for it. So now France is kind of becoming like the enemy when they were the allies saving Scotland from England. And now England is like protection of Scotland from France in a way. So like all these like alliances that we started out with are all shifting around.
Yeah.
And like, you know, the de Guises were the Queen Mother, whatever her name is, who was a sympathetic character. What? Sorry?
The Dowager Queen?
Yeah, the Dowager Queen, who like she's the one who gives Lymond the like, thank you for serving your country, you're great, here's your mom in a room, I got her for you. Like she's like a positive figure in the first book, and now the de Guises are the enemy.
Yeah, well, because they're French. We don't like the French anymore, apparently.
I mean, it's
Well,
not
and
very.
they they got the young queen on their side. What is the word I'm looking for?
Suborned?
Suborned, thank you. The queen, and so now she's like done this betrayal of Scotland.
Well, she is a Degese. I mean, she's literally half Degese. But it's also like, it's back to what you're saying about like everybody wants more power. France wants power. At the time, it suited them to help Scotland. Now, at the time, it suits them to, try to overrule and use Scotland. And this was like, even all the way back in Game of Kings, it was like, this is a real risk of making this deal with France and sending our monarch away, but we have to do it because it's our best option of a bunch of bad options. So it's not like the French are now evil and they were good before. It's just like alliances have shifted and everyone's out for power.
Yeah. The balance of power has shifted.
And then interesting that Lymond tells Richard the diatribe we just heard was for your benefit, my Calvinist friend, not for mine. Because Diggy's tried to send him away, so I'm not sure it was for his benefit, but it does make sense. They're trying to intimidate the potential, I guess, rebels against France who are in Scotland.
Mm.
So Lymond and Richard are heading to Paris on their way home. Margaret Lennox has been informed of something, and Lymond has a lot of enemies in France right now.
And almost everybody else is back in Scotland except for Danny.
Scotland or
Danny and Marta. Danny and Marta are in Blois. Richard and Lymond are going to Paris. The letter is on its way to Margaret Lennox in England. And Austin and Philippa are in England in Fla Valley.
Yeah.
with Adam.
With Adam, right. And everybody else is going to Scotland? Is that right?
The men, except Danny and Sibylla, yeah.
Yeah.
And Flaw Valleys is just over the border with Scotland. So
Almost Scotland.
So what will happen? Where are we headed?
The end of the book. The end of the series.
This is your last chance to guess what's going to happen next.
Well, I think wherever Margaret Lennox is, they're going there for sure, or she's coming to them. I mean, we're definitely gonna have some sort of Margaret Lennox showdown. Hopefully we end up in Flaw Valleys or Midholter eventually.
There's got to be some Flaw Valleys. We need to check in on Kate and Kazum.
Right, we need to.
We can't end the book without at least hearing about them.
Yeah.
You know, it's wrapping things up, so.
And what's happening with Danny and Marta and Blois in the mysterious closet?
And we need more information about Sibylla and Francis I and Gavin.
Yes, we need to know that for sure. I can't remember. Are we still suspecting that they were married, or do we know that they're married now?
I don't think we have had any proof that they were married before.
Okay, we have no
proof.
What
we suspected.
We suspected.
It's the only way it makes sense to us.
Yeah, I'm so confused about what we know. We don't know. Like, and who knows what, you know? So Richard still doesn't know anything, basically, except that Marta exists. But he doesn't know the Francis I part, right? No. Yeah.
Well, remember, he was a lot older when Francis I died. He would have been 13 when Francis I died. So he has a much better recollection of Francis I.
But does he? I mean, did Francis I ever visit him? Like, I can't imagine that Gavin and his father, like, I can't imagine that Gavin allowed his father to come.
True. And Sibylla went back to France to be with him.
Sibylla went to France and left Richard.
But Lyman knew him when he was 3. He died when Lyman was 3, so he must have been at Midcoulter sometimes.
No, wasn't Lyman in France with them?
Are you still at your grandfather's door kicking it? That implies that Grandpa lived at the house.
Oh.
I mean, admittedly, that's kind of metaphorical too.
Oh, that's weird. For some reason, I assumed that Sibylla lived in France with young Lymond and Eloise.
No, remember she took them back to Scotland right after they were born. We don't know. I guess we don't know if Francis I went with her, though. Maybe he didn't.
You probably know.
Yeah, do you know?
So.
I don't know. It seems like that would be super weird. Like, I mean, it's not that the situation isn't ridiculously weird to begin with, but that does seem like extra weird. If Francis I goes back to Midcoulter.
Sibylla and her 2 husbands.
Yeah. Super strange. Unless maybe we are wrong. Like, there's a total possibility that we're wrong and that they weren't married. And there's some other random explanation for all of this.
Well, it does sort of imply that Francis I was around the house, because like the implication we keep getting is she slept with her husband's dad. She slept with her father-in-law. Like,
right.
Yeah.
It was so incestuous.
Yeah.
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 So
that's what I think I'm most looking forward to, is a concrete answer on the whole parent. Well, we know who the parents are, but like the story behind it.
Right. What are the implications for the parentage, and what are the implications for like all the timing and stuff? I want to know that. I feel like Jarrett and Marta are not going to get it together. Like, maybe they will, but I'm losing hope for them. I'm losing hope. Maybe Marta will. I
said we need that good sex scene between
Lymond
and Philippa.
I don't think it's gonna happen. I feel like maybe Marta will be like a successful merchant in Lyon, and that will be her. Jarrett will be Lyman's right-hand man, and Marta will be a successful merchant in Lyon.
Philippe's saying he wants the sex scene with Francis and Philippa.
Philippa and Lymond.
Oh, that sex
Not
scene.
Marta and Jarrett. I don't think that's gonna happen. No, yeah. They've had plenty of time.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice. I'd like to have a better sex scene than we had with Una and Francis. Like, I'll be sad if the best like on-screen physical affection that Lymond gets this entire series is with Una. It seems like that would be.
Poor Una.
I know. Poor Una. I don't know. What else?
How's the Austin situation going to resolve?
Oh, that's going to be a disaster. He's going to do something terrible. Like
Austin or Lymond, one of them or both of them.
Yeah, I don't think.
They're not both going to end up alive. One of them.
I agree with that 100%. I think one of them's going to die. Hopefully it's Austin.
Well, I should hope so.
I don't see him living to the end of the book. Yeah. Not if he keeps going the ways. Unless like he has a come to Jesus moment, if like Kate grabs a hold of him or something and it's like snap out of it. Maybe.
No, but I totally ship the Kate and Adam thing.
Me too.
So much.
Yeah, I totally agree with. I don't think it's gonna happen, but I totally think that would be. He would be so good. Adam's so great.
And the nice thing is, if it doesn't explicitly say one thing or the other by the end of the book, we can always just say that that's what happens.
Yeah.
No one can tell us any differently.
That's right.
I do wish we'd gotten more Kate in this book, but since we have so much Sibylla and Philippa, they kind of fill the same narrative roles.
Yeah. But I do sort of, even because of her character, like my assumption as a reader is that she's fine. Like she's at Flaw Valley's, she's taking care of Kazum. She's raising him, like she's fine. She's raising the kid. He's growing up healthy, you know, all that. But it would be nice to see her.
Anything else you're wanting or hoping to see, or that you're afraid of and you hope doesn't happen?
I'm afraid Margaret Lennox is going to win in some way, because we know she doesn't die. So, not that death is the only way to lose, but
I think Queen Mary definitely is going to die in these next 4 chapters, and that's basically Margaret Lennox losing, because all of her political power will go away once Elizabeth is queen.
right. What month are we in right now? Do we know? Well, Charles V just died. We could look up what his death day was.
The like sort of war things they were talking about, and when the mill sort of hit him in the river, that was mid to late August.
So we're like in September-ish.
Probably like early mid-September. And remember, it took what? How long did it take to cross the English Channel back then? Certainly not hours like it does now.
But not a long time. It's not that far. If you can swim it, it's not that far.
Yeah.
Not that I can swim it, but people have swam it.
Well, but they're not, the Scottish contingency isn't going, it'll take them a little longer to go up the coast of Scotland, so.
Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, died 21st of September, 1558.
Okay.
Oh,
Like at the end of September.
You're like in September, early October. Because I think Mary dies in November. So yeah, I think you're right. She is going to die before then.
I think that's going to be how we see Margaret Lennox lose her power. Because you're right. She has to live longer than this book, as much as I would have loved to have seen her die.
But I have to say, like, I kind of hope that's not what happens, because as a reader, I don't want her defeat to become because the queen died. Like, I want her defeat to come because Lymond and or Philippa give her a comeuppance. Like, I want her to lose because Lymond does something that outwits her or somehow defeats her. Like, I don't want her to just like lose her power and slink off to wherever she's from, you know. But we'll see. We'll see.
And I'm worried about Sibylla.
Yeah.
I feel like she's going to finally tell the truth on her deathbed or something.
Yeah. I mean, we've had the reconciliation, and they've mentioned several times that she's frail, etc. So.
All right.
We'll see.
Oh my God, we're almost there. 4 chapters. Our next session is probably the last.
It's so weird.
Yeah, we'll have to think about how to reflect on the whole series when we talk about the end.
Yeah.
If you guys are not beating down the door with rage and huffing off.
yeah. If this book ends sad, or like if I'm angry at the end of it, I'm not gonna want to reflect on the series, just so you know.
It was all a trick.
Yeah, if this ends bad, I'm gonna be like, I never want to read this again.
There's a chance it may end up in my trash can, like book 4 and book 5 both did for a small amount of time.
Yeah.
Throw it across the room and then run over and get it and keep reading.
I mean, I think that's how I reacted to the Red Wedding. So
yeah,
I did that to a Nicholas Sparks book about and I've never read another book by him. The one about the ocean. I don't know. The hero of the book like dies at the end. Sorry to spoil it for people. The hero of the book dies at the end of the book, and it's a romance novel. So this is a romance novel where he kills the hero at the end of the book, just to manipulatively make his reading audience cry. Like he totally betrayed the conventions of the genre, and I was so angry. I threw the book across the room and threw it in the trash can, and I've never read another Nicholas Sparks book ever. I think that was the first one of his I ever read, and I'm like, nope, never again.
I don't think I've ever done anything like that. I think it's if something engages me, it engages me, but it's like I will definitely stop reading something and not read anything by them again if I'm like, if I decide like they pushed whatever boundary of like crappy writing or like offensive sexism or like I completely disagree with your point of view on the world and I can't reconcile like your politics with my own or whatever. But like I don't think there's ever been like a plot twist or whatever where a character got killed that made me stop reading. But
I just like, I mean, the Red Wedding was like a shock and all that, but I don't feel like the Red Wedding was a betrayal of the genre.
Well,
in the way like in the way that Nicholas Sparks book was. It's like if I go into the book expecting certain genre conventions to be upheld that are like foundational, if you break those, I'm done. Like
I thought of one. What's the show? The Magicians, the one that Sarah Gamble was running?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Like I tried to keep watching after the like really stupid killing off of someone who like, I shouldn't spoil it. Yeah. And I tried to keep watching and I was just like,
nope.
Like no, like you lost me.
Yeah. The last season wasn't great anyway, but mostly because of how they ended the fourth season.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I was like, it was just a total betrayal of what the show was supposed to be. And it's like, nope.
And they built up a ship that everyone wanted to sail. And they were like, the ship, here's the ship. Look how romantic it is. And we kill one of them. It was also like the main character of the show. Yeah. And then like I loved the other character in the ship. I thought he was great. And I tried to keep watching because I liked him. But it was just like,
I 100% agree with you. 100%.
Anyway, that's a tangent.
Yeah. All right. Okay, next. We just don't want it to end.
No, that's totally it. Well, we'll see you all next time for our very final book club. Thank you for watching and commenting.
Bye.